Hi, I'm Susan and welcome to Susan Stanley Stitching Time. On this channel, I like to discuss textiles and stitching from the past, and I like to share my projects with you. And it's been a while. This is episode number 49, and thank you all for joining me. Those who keep coming back, I thank you. And if you're new, welcome. Today, I'm going to share some cross stitch and some quilting projects that I've been working on. I have a little bit of haul and a book report on something that I think you'll love if you would like the content in this channel. I have a new chapter in the story of Corliss, my fictional girl from Kentucky in 1870, and as we join her on her sewing adventures, and have a life update and a little bit to talk about in the shop. So let's get started. So if you've been with me, you know that last year I took a time period. I took 1840 and really focused on that, and I picked a fictional girl. You know, I created a story around a little girl who was learning her first stitches. And in that experience, I stitched a marking sampler from 1840. Now this is from Hedgerow Stitching, one of her charts, and Mary Bretnell, and I stitched it using the materials that we have available today that would most closely approximate what my little girl, who was also named Mary last year, what she would have had available to her. And in 1840, linen was bleached, very pure white. That was what was desirable, and a silk thread approximating a Goblin's was probably likely the most available to this little girl. So I stitched a roll-up marking sampler that she would keep in her work basket for marking linens and clothing items and household things. So of course this year now I have two new girls, Farabee and Corliss, and we've been talking about them quite a bit, and we are going to talk more about them. And Farabee, remember, she was the younger stepsister who had been left behind with her mom and stepfather as Corliss goes off to live with her aunt. And if you want to know more about this, I will link the episodes below that showcase this story, because I'm kind of building chapters each floss tube so you can follow along with the story. And it's just a fun way to kind of get into the shoes of another time period and try to understand the thinking of another time period, because it's so hard to separate the way we look at the world today from the way the world was looked at in the past. And to understand why things were done the way they were done, you really have to try to embrace that and try to go there. So I'm trying to go there with Farabee. Now Farabee is the younger sister, like I said, and she, even in 1870, would have been doing a marking sampler that was still done, although it was starting to wane a tiny bit. And as you will see, the marking samplers, I couldn't find a ton of charts to pick from, but I did find a lovely one, Amy Florence Ogilvie from Hedgerow Stitching. And this is going to be what I stitch for Farabee. I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided if I'm going to change the name to Farabee. And let me show you what I might do. So Farabee would have been stitching on a very rough, open, woven linen. And let me show you an antique example that I have of this very open, kind of almost more rustic linen. And this sample is from Europe, and it's from 1906, and I have shown it before, but I think this more closely approximates what would have been available in 1870. Don't you just love this finish? It's just gorgeous. It is turned over or turned under, and hemmed with a blanket stitch all the way around. Now, the reason I wanted to show this to you is twofold, because this linen and the floss that was used the linen is closely approximating what I'm going to try to do, and the floss was wool. And so by this time, you know, wool was being used, and so wool was being used all through the century. But I picked wool for this project. I did kind of a sample here where I did a Verissois and Appleton's and Fine du Abusson on a little swatch. So you can see kind of the coverage you get with those different threads. And if you're interested in a little more detail on that, please let me know. I can definitely show it to you. So this linen I'm using is a 30 count rain barrel. Oop. Okay, sorry, hold please. And I'm using a number 22 needle, and I started stitching it using the wool, and there are 2 shades actually in the chart. So let me show you here. I'll hold this up. 2 shades of red. I think that's going to be really fun to have that kind of just that play a little bit of shading in the lettering. And I'm so glad that, you know, I noticed that when I didn't notice it initially when I looked at the chart, and when I found that, when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I mean, I don't know if you can tell, I love that Rebecca puts the original on her cover of her chart, so you can see how it looks today. Anyway, so this is what I'm going to stitch for Farabee for my 1870 project. Now this might also become a roll-up that goes into her work basket, or it might be hemmed like this to be hung up. I don't know, but I think that's a pretty good match and approximation. You know, we can't really truly, like even with quilts, we can't truly make an exact copy or reproduce something exactly, because we only have the materials that are available today. But we can get close and we can enjoy the experience. And that's why I thought using this wool would be, I have used wool on Jane Parsons when I started that, but I think it's going to be really fun. I have to say that stitching this little border here was super fun, and I imagine something like this on the bottom of a cuff or on a collar, just a fine detail, or maybe a pillowcase. So that's one project I've been working on, and as I mentioned a minute ago, I might change the name on this version to Farabee, but I was thinking perhaps I would use this beautiful Himalayan fog, which is 38 count, and SWA 103, and stitch it in an updated version, which, you know, isn't that what we do now? We take these samplers that were made and stitched on really low count linens, and then we like to stitch them on high count linens and miniaturize them and do all kinds of things. And I'm sure people in the future will look back and try to figure out why we did that, but I don't know, it's kind of fun. So anyway, I thought I could do a version and use Amy Florence Ogilvie's name on a more updated linen. So that's one project I've been messing around with. I also got the threads for, I know I showed you last time, Little Pear Tree Pin Keep by Scattered Seed Samplers, and I just thought it was darling, and I wanted to bring it, I wanted to freshen it a little bit into like a springtime look. And I have a pear tree that I planted last year, and it's got a ton of blooms on it, so I don't know. And I was super inspired by this fabric. I have yards and yards of it in my stash, in my collection, and I love this fabric. I don't know why. I bought a ton of it, and I haven't used it yet because, I don't know, do you do that? Like if something's super special, you just kind of keep it? I need to use it, and I thought this would be so pretty to bring this into this color scheme and use this and, you know, create a different finish so that this really is showcased as well. So I ordered a whole bunch of different threads, and I know everybody likes to see the yummy. So I got a bunch of different shades of greens and yellows to try to come up with something that complements the fabric and the design and looks nice on. I was planning to use Russian tea cake. I started stitching it with the threads I had available, and I realized, oh, I really need to get some different shades. So I might even try. So here's what I did, and I know this is probably overkill, and a lot of you probably think, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just stitch it? But this is the fun for me. I love doing this. I love playing with the colors. So here are some of the colors I've been auditioning, and I've just made this little test strip, and hopefully, you know, and because I stitched it on the color linen that I'm planning to use, I get a better representation of how that color plays against that linen, and I'm looking forward to diving into this. So so that's something else I've been playing with and working on. And then lastly, if you follow me and you are following the story of Farabee and Corliss, like I said, you know that Corliss was moved to live with her aunt, and she was given the task of making hexagon flowers out of her aunt's scrap fabrics that she had accumulated from all the wrappers that her aunt, that Aunt Edith makes to wear in the home. And so I continued making some more hexagon flowers. And if you know that you can get a starter pack for this in my shop, or if you want to try this, I do have a tutorial up. And what I thought was kind of fun is I took 3 packets and I mixed the fabrics so that there was 2 of the same, and then 2, and then 2. So you get a lot of variety. So I just kept making these, and I've had a lot going on, so this has been really peaceful and fun. And I'm going to put a video in now because I've been playing with settings, because that's something else Corliss would have done. Now, she wouldn't have had the benefit of the hexagon graph paper that I shared on Instagram a week or so ago. She would have been playing just on the floor with her little shapes and moving them around and trying to come up with a setting for her flowers. And this, a lot of people commented and said, oh, I thought that was, you know, from the Grandma's Flower Garden from the 1930s. These shapes and this design element for making quilts and bed curtains and all sorts of things dates way back into the late 1700s. So it's been around a long time. So let me put this little video in of what I've been playing with for settings, and yeah, I'll let you look at that. Okay, here are some of the hexagon flowers that our little fictional girl from Kentucky, 1870, Corliss, has been making. She received a lot of these, pulled a lot of these fabrics out of her aunt's scrap bag, where she had thrown her leftover pieces from her wrappers that she makes for herself, and then she was gifted a lot of these from other quilters and stitchers in the community at stitching events. So you can see there's a lot of fabrics represented. There's turkey reds, there are poison greens, there are Prussian blues, there are shirtings, and these are all fabrics that would have been available from probably 30 years prior to her stitching this, probably 1840 up to 1870. And she's had a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun putting these combinations together. Some of them are kind of busy, some of them are kind of crazy, some of them are calmer and more subdued. but oh, it's going to be fun. So I'm having a blast laying this out, and I finally picked a design that I think is going to work. So that's one thing I've been working on. I am throwing a tiny bit of brown in there, kind of calms it down, gives it a little grounding, and then of course this fabulous turkey red is the setting piece, and then it'll be the frame. So I've been busy working on those. I left all the papers in still. Some have holes, some don't. And I'll start putting those together. And so, of course, besides the threads that I got for the little pear pin keep that I'm going to put together, I also purchased several embellishment threads to use on my Civil War Bride blocks. And I will link below my last episode where I go into more detail about that, because if you don't know about that quilt that I've been making, reinterpreting, the pattern is not an exact copy of the original, but you can see that in the previous episode. I just wanted to show you this luscious tray of threads. This is not, so this is 103, it's Goblins, it's Perlay, and I think there's some Trebizond in there too. Isn't that so pretty? Oh, I just love it. So I'm going to be adding some embellishment work to those blocks, kind of along the lines of what was done on some Baltimore album quilt blocks earlier in the mid 1800 time period, and just kind of playing with that. So that was a big fun investment right there, getting those. And I don't know if most of you know that Quiltmania, a very wonderful publishing company, mostly focused on quilts, but also, you know, other fiber arts came into play in some of their publications. They are going out of business. And there was a book that I've been wanting to get for quite some time, and I thought, now's the time. And this is a book that showcases a collection of a woman named Jane Laurie. And this book is up close and personal pictures of her quilts. And these are antique quilts. They are not patterns. This is her antique quilt collection. Her collection is vast and varied. That starts off with chintz and medallion, and goes forward into, you know, she collected textiles from all over the world. She has this gorgeous collection. This is in her collection as well, with that trapuntoed white work. And some other applique. So I have really been enjoying this. This is really, it's kind of a coffee table book, but it's also a study in fabrics from different time periods and how combinations were put together. And of course, you know me, that this one's actually done in wool. What a fantastic, fantastic color combination. So anyway, that was something. Look at this on the back cover. Oh my goodness. When you can get up close and personal like that and see that is a motif off of a piece of fabric that has been cut to the desired shape, focusing on the motifs that the person wanted to showcase, and then it's been appliqued. It's called Broderie Purse, and I'll talk about that some more. I know some of you are quilters, some of you are cross stitchers, some of you are knitters. You know, I'm so glad you're here, because I think all the fiber and the color and the textiles, they all work together, which leads me to my next piece of haul. And this is, I almost burst out of my skin when I saw this. I thought, oh, they really are encapsulating what I feel is so important This is the DAR Museum exhibition catalog, and this exhibition is currently being featured at the DAR, and it's called Sewn in America, Making Meaning and Memory. And when I saw this, I knew that somebody was looking at the whole umbrella of stitching and textiles during the 1800s. And looking at this, I wasn't disappointed. I got it. I ordered it right away from the museum store. I wish I could have gotten on a plane and flown there immediately to see the exhibit, but that wasn't going to happen. So I got the book, and I've just been poring over it. And if you like the content on this channel where I talk about girlhood stitching and seamstresses, mantua makers, all the things, quilters, all the things that were being done, because nothing was being done in isolation. Nobody just cross-stitched. Nobody just quilted. Nobody solely made clothing items unless that was their vocation, and then they would have to go home and do other work for the home, including marking linens, making textiles for the home, etc. So this catalog and this exhibition showcases that whole world of stitching and sewing and textiles in the 1800s in America. And so, you know, it starts out with the sewn objects that are around us from the time we're born through the entirety of our life and until our lives end. And it was never more prevalent and significant than before the Industrial Revolution, because everything had to be made by hand, and you know, the hours and hours of labor are just, it's really breathtaking to think about what was done. What I like about this book, it shows us that the textiles and the tools of the past and the knowledge and the techniques that were used were instilled in childhood, just like we talk about with Mary and Farabee and the little girls that I feature, and that it became a part of daily life of women, mostly, not only, there were men, no matter their station. You know, if you had lots of money, you still were stitching. And there's so many mixed messages about women and sewing, and some people think it was demeaning. But then I've heard a lecture recently where it was like an escape. It was your time to get into your own thoughts and think through things that are happening in your life. It's so meditative. I know if you stitch, you know this, if you stitch on any level. So I have to say that I'm sure there were some who didn't like sewing, but I think it was an escape, and I think it was also a pleasure, because there were types of needlework done that were beyond the necessity. And I think that's what I love about this exhibition. It really showcased all the types of needlework. Of course, their samplers are featured, marking samplers and pictorial samplers. It talks about how these skills were taught, just like we've looked at with Mary, and we will look at with Farabee and Corliss, and how and why did women mostly and people choose to stitch beyond the tasks that were required. And so some of the things featured in this book are garment making, schoolgirl needlework. There is a little bit of craftivism where messages were intentionally placed into the stitching. Now that doesn't mean everything has a message, and I want to make sure that we acknowledge that the way we look at images and messages today is not always how it was looked at in the past. This book also features how girls learned to sew, necessary needlework, plain sewing, fancy work, and then how you shared your identity in your stitching. I think it is just very well done and really encompasses the whole gamut of what this channel is, what I'm trying to approach. So I think you need this book. I hope if you do, and if you get to go to the exhibit, oh boy, please let me know. Please tell me about it. I would love to hear from you. All right, now I'd like to take you into the world of Corliss and Farabee. And the reason I'm doing this is so that you can kind of attach yourself a little bit to what it was like in the 1870s. This year we're looking at 1870, and what it was like to be a young girl, and not to say that other people weren't stitching. There were boys stitching as well, but we're going to look at these young girls and try to kind of recapture their experience. And so I have a lot of notes here because it's quite a bit. So if you bear with me, I'm going to be looking down and glancing at my notes because I want to read the next chapter to you and tell you the next chapter in the life of our little girl Corliss. Now here's Corliss's picture if you haven't seen it. And in my last Floss tube, we joined Corliss, and she's our fictional girl from Kentucky, as she took her train ride to live with her Aunt Edith in Louisville. I've been instructed on how to say that, and I'm working on it. Believe me, I promise you. And this was, like I said, not uncommon, especially at that time, for children to be sent to other family members to complete their education, or if a family member needed help because of illness or other issues in the home. And so Aunt Edith has been super anxious to get started working with Corliss on her sewing skills. Aunt Edith only had boys, and she is thrilled to impart to a young lady her knowledge. Her first project has been to construct these English paper pieced flowers. And as I mentioned earlier, you can join her on that experience if you like. And many of you have and are making them. And so Corliss has been using the fabric scraps from Aunt Edith's wrappers. And in last episode, we took a look at what a wrapper was. And she's found that selecting the fabrics is just as enjoyable as stitching them together. And so she has been making combinations just like you. And she's been invited to join Aunt Edith at the Next Ladies Sewing Circle, held at the First Baptist Church every Tuesday. And Aunt Edith is involved with 2 sewing groups, and this was not uncommon. Sewing circles were a major hub of social activity, and each group meets once a week, and one group is involved in charity work and for the community, and the other one is purely social. And that was extremely common. And don't we kind of do the same thing today? I mean, we meet for social with retreats and all kinds of fun things so we can get together and share our projects. So Corliss is very excited, and she's also very nervous about going to her first sewing circle event. And you can imagine, this was a young girl entering an adult world. She knows she'll meet several new people, and she wants to make Aunt Edith proud. She's been working hard to have 5 of her hexagon flowers completed to share with the group. She's going to help serve tea at the event, and she's going to share a reading because it was very common entertainment, reading aloud. That was in homes and at events. And so sewing circles at this time were just such an integral part of society during the 19th century because sewing was not an option, it was a necessity. So Tuesday arrives, and Corliss gathers her things, and Aunt Edith adds Corliss's sewing supplies to her fancy work basket because they're going out, they're going to take the fancy work basket. It's not the common homework basket for necessity stitching in the home. And it's a drippy day when Corliss and Aunt Edith set out, and Corliss has butterflies in her stomach as they walk to the church. Everything in Louisville is so different, and there are so many people and buildings, and it's not at all like the rural town of Boyette, where she grew up. As they approach the building, she hears laughter and singing, and her fears start to calm. When they enter the building, Aunt Edith begins introducing Corliss to the others who are already seated at the table. "She favors your side of the family," exclaims one lady in a blue plaid dress who's looking at Aunt Edith. Corliss says, "Thank you, ma'am," and curtsies, and move to the next seated lady. "Is this the niece you were talking about?" says another, and both Aunt Edith and Corliss swell with pride. A kind elderly lady introduces herself to Corliss and helps her get settled at the sewing table before she gives her instructions for serving tea. There are several other girls who will be helping serve tea today, and Corliss is thrilled to meet each one of them. One of the girls, Sarah Jane, takes a special interest in Corliss and offers to work alongside her and answer any questions. Sarah Jane has been asked to take the girls out to wash up before serving tea. After tea is served, Corliss gathers her stitching supplies from Aunt Edith and takes her seat. She knows she will be reading later in the day, and she is so nervous thinking about it while she stitches. Corliss has practiced her reading so many times she could recite it from memory. Several of the ladies are sharing their work. One lady with lovely dark hair shares the completed quilt the group has put together for a traveling minister who will be visiting later in the year. The red and green blocks are beautiful, and Corliss wishes she could make something like that. This was very common to honor someone who had come and given something to the community. It was very common to repay them in kindness with a quilt, and it would have been a showpiece, something that the person took home and maybe put out just for special visitors. It wasn't heavily used. Another lady with squinty eyes shows the embellishment stitches she added to her blouse. Each stitch is so tiny and perfect, and Corliss is amazed. A jolly lady passes around her Berlin work piece done in silk. Corliss thinks she's never seen anything so pretty before. A lady at the end of the table announces that the local merchant just received new Berlin work wool hanks. Each item is passed around for everyone to examine. And Berlin work, as we're going to find out more, was really all the rage in 1870, and there are charts out there, and I know if you are a cross stitcher or a stitcher of things from the past, you will know about this. Aunt Edith asks Corliss to share her hexagon flowers, and so she picks them up and passes them around the table. Everyone is very kind and compliments her on her tiny stitches and her fabric combinations. And several of the ladies offer scraps from their projects to add to her collection. So now Corliss has gained more for her project. This was really common, and just a kindness amongst stitchers. And don't we do that today? I know for sure we share fabric, as if you're a quilter, if you're working on a project and it's a cross-stitch project and you're missing the right color, we swap colors, we share. It's just part of the community of stitching. Sarah Jane is especially enthusiastic about Corliss's work. Corliss sits down at the table and is next to Sarah Jane. And Corliss notices that Sarah Jane has her own fancy work bag, and she hopes one day she'll have one too. Sarah Jane offers to share her scissors with Corliss during the day. After lunch, it's time for the readings, and Corliss is first. Aunt Edith had picked Psalm 119, 9 through 15 for Corliss to read aloud, and she hopes her voice will carry and she doesn't stumble over her words. Corliss has the passage memorized. Nevertheless, with shaky hands, she opens Aunt Edith's Bible to the correct page and begins reading. As soon as she's done, she feels a huge sense of relief. She looks at Sarah Jane, and she's smiling, and Aunt Edith and several of the other ladies compliment her on what a good job she's done. The next reading is a poem by Louisa May Alcott. You may be familiar with her, entitled My Kingdom, and it is read by Sarah Jane, followed by a bit of news from the local newspaper, The Advocate Messenger. This was really common to have things read allowed from publications local and from afar, especially if somebody had traveled and brought back a publication, a newspaper from another city. Everybody wanted to know what was going on there, because remember, there's no TV. Sarah Jane joins Corliss and Aunt Edith on the walk home, and Corliss shows Aunt Edith Sarah Jane's fancy work bag. "Did you make this?" exclaims Aunt Edith. "Yes, ma'am," states Sarah Jane. It's decided that Sarah Jane will help Corliss make her own fancy work sewing set using fabric pieces from Aunt Edith's wrapper scraps, the larger pieces. I hope you're finding this fictional story a fun way to experience a little bit of stitching history and learn alongside a young girl from Kentucky. I've really had fun putting this together and making Stitching from the Past come alive for you. A little bit of a life update for me in closing. My son is getting married in June, next month, June 15th. I am rapidly being caught up in all the company and activities and events that surround this really happy time in my family. And so I won't be back until the end of June with another floss tube. However, I do plan to share some things on Instagram, and some of the things that I've shared in the past, like textile history and secrets in the stitches, I might start sharing on Instagram posts. If you're not on Instagram, it's really not hard. If you have access to a computer, you can access Instagram, and I would highly encourage you to do that. Not just for me. There is so much creative activity going on. There are so many people with fabulous, interesting things that they're doing to follow. There's so much inspiration. FlossTube is great. YouTube videos are great, but Instagram is just a little burst of happy sewing, stitching, history, textile beauty that you can capture on a daily basis. So please look there for some of my new posts. I do have some new items in the store in honor of my son's wedding. I have a new textile interpreter collection called the Trousseau collection. So I hope you'll pop over and look at that if you're interested. Lou and Sue have some things to share on there as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for taking this journey with me with Corliss and Farabee, and just kind of reliving a little bit of what stitching was like in the past. I know if you love recreating samplers and quilts from an earlier time period, it's a really great way to attach meaning to what you do. So until then, and make time for stitching. Bye, friends.